Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Deirdra Watson, and I am the Managing Director of Concept Solutions, Public Relations, Event Management, and Website Design. And I've started a new YouTube channel and program called Let's Talk Events. And today is our first episode, so welcome aboard, everyone. And I'm happy to say that my first guest is Heather Reid of Planner Protect. Heather has almost 30 years of experience in the event planning industry as both an entrepreneurial event planner and a CEO of a consulting company agency, Planner Protect Inc. As an expert in contract negotiations, Heather has been a guest author for Ignite magazines, Meetings and Incentive Travel magazine, and Corporate Meetings Network. She has been invited to speak on the topic for numerous Canadian industry organizations, including MPI, PCMA, CanSpec,
and on and on.
And on and on. And it has been a privilege to be a recipient of several industry awards, including CMEE Hall of Fame, Smart Women Meetings, CanSpec's Heidi Wilker Award in Excellence in Mentorship, and most recently, the Courtney Stanley's Women to Watch for 2022 list. Well, Heather, that's awesome. Oh my gosh. See, well, I've known you for a little while, and I didn't know that you were so accomplished. That's
awesomeness. I don't know about accomplished, maybe persistent and blessed. But yeah, I've been thrilled to be recognized, but it comes with a lot of people that have supported me for sure, as you know, right? None of anything in this industry happens by yourself, but yeah, I've been honored and it's been a real blessing. So,
well, thank you again for being on our show today. The reason I wanted to have you as my first guest is because we are starting to move forward. I won't say going back, because we can never go back, but we're starting to move forward in the event industry again. And one of the biggest things that people need to consider is contracts. And you know what's going on right now, especially with clauses and everything else and rates. We've seen rates kind of triple and whatnot. So I wonder if you could share with us first, what are you seeing in the contracts that you're looking at for your clients? Because and maybe you can tell us how much you're trying to save, or you know what I mean in regards to contracts, how you go through them, and then you advise your clients on the best alternative for them to look at.
Sure, and I'm happy to. And let me just say, what a distinguished honor. No pressure to be the first guest, because yeah, I'm thrilled. So my service is really unique in that I'm a planner that's, had almost 30 years of looking at contracts. And I can remember, Deirdra, the very first contract that I was given, and I don't think any of us at my age went to school for event planning. We are what we call accidental planners. We came into this by an alternative route. But the very first contract I was handed by an association was a 22-page convention center contract. So right there, for those that look at contracts, you know that those can be quite intimidating. And it scared me. It absolutely scared me. And I thought, I am way out of my depth. And it has to have been right from that moment that I had this real fear of being seen as someone to guide a client and encourage them to sign a contract for their piece of business. And so I started, now I love school. I love the learning aspect. No one comes to me for a creative vision, but I do love the academic side of our industry. And so I absolutely dug in deep, and I took that fear and really tried to educate myself. What does a contract need to protect my client? Because I realized really early on, every contract that is presented to us has had someone paid as a legal advisor and a legal professional to create that contract to protect the party that is presenting the contract.
Absolutely.
And so I needed to seek out legal counsel for my clients, but I really felt my role first was to get that contract as close as I could and as best as I could as a meeting planner, and then seek counsel for the clients. And so over the 30 years, I've realized that what I love to do, which is that part, some have said I'd rather have a root canal. Some have said I'd rather quit than look at another contract. And I realized about 7 years ago that, I wonder if there's a way I could create a business around this one very niche service that would support planners, support corporations, support associations with that just one piece of the journey. Because I really believe we all have certain strengths, and we try to be jack of all trades in many respects as meeting planners, as you know, right? We look at everything from marketing to registration to floor plans to AV to power to speaker management, but I thought this was one thing that if planners really don't like this part, and you have to really like reading very fine print. You have to like reading between the lines almost to really figure out, what is this contract making me or my client responsible for? What is this contract making my client accountable for? What measures do they have to meet in order to satisfy the contract? So anyway, so what I do for clients is that I take that pain away of having to spend 10 hours focused on a contract. And I use my 30 years as a planner. So Deirdre, as you know, contracts have legalese aspects to them, and those are best left with legal counsel.
That's right.
We can learn about them and we can explain what those clauses are to our clients, but they are left best for legal counsel. But a lot of the contract are the logistics. A lot of the contract is about the financial aspects. A lot of the contract is about space or rates or room blocks, things like that. And so it doesn't necessarily, a lawyer is not going to look with a planner's lens at those pieces of the contract. So I go through and I've curated my own 52-point checklist, which, okay, I don't share. Okay, so it's a little bit of IP. I teach about stuff because I do want to, share what I've learned, but I don't share that checklist. But every single contract I go through, I use that checklist to say, okay, has this contract addressed, say, cancellation by the property? We all know that every contract has a cancellation clause if the group wants to cancel, but probably 95% of contracts don't have a reciprocal clause that says, well, what if the venue wants to cancel? And so that's a protection that is needed by the group to be able to make sure that they've gone in and protected their finances, their risk. Absolutely. So I look at what's on the paper, what from my, and as you know, Deirdre, when you get close to a contract, you kind of get blurry, right? You kind of lose track. And I come in with fresh eyes and go, well, I know that venue, and I think that X, Y, and Z might work better for a space allocation. Have you thought about this? And, it allows someone with fresh eyes to come in, because I look at everything right from space allocation to flow. I do the math. I don't know how many times, probably 1 out of 3 contracts have mathematical errors in them. Yeah. Well, that's worth doing the work and figuring those out to make sure that it's accurate in the mathematical. So that's the lens, and I call it forensic because I don't have a better word. Forensic, I guess, probably means like post event, but that's not what this is. I don't know another word to really say that it's with a microscopic view of what is in a contract, what is not in a contract that should be put in. And then I work with the clients in a couple of different ways. It's about, do you as a planner or as an event host, do you want to remain the face of your negotiations? Great. let's be the silent weapon, right?
Absolutely.
Do you want a partner that goes into those negotiations with you? Or do you want someone to come in and negotiate for you? And so there's a couple of different things. So that's a long-winded answer to say this is a very niche surface, but contracts, as you know, Deirdra, are the underpinning, and I can't stress that enough. Every aspect of our industry starts and hopefully never ends with a contract, because everything from our speaker agreements to our AV contracts to our catering to our decorating to our mobile app to our every single aspect of our industry starts with a contract. And we don't think about those contracts again until things go sideways. And then we have to count on those contracts to either leverage them or defend, you know. So it really, I think they're just such an essential piece to really embrace about our industry and the role that planners have. So,
and I totally agree, because I've, and I mentioned this to you before, I've been brought in after contracts have been signed.
That's a hard spot.
And, you know, you see things on the final philo and you just kind of look at them and go, what is this? And then you're negotiating back. Or one event that I worked on, we found out 6 weeks before we were to go live that they were going to demolish a 40-room tower. And I said, and I looked at the contract and I went, where's the construction clause? There was no construction clause. And a lot of contracts don't have construction clauses in them because people don't think to ask.
Right. And unless you've lived through it, right? So Deirdra, I know that construction's on your radar. And I learned about construction clause when I did have a client who then had to put up with, you know, construction in the foyer, and we're trying to do registration. And, you know, there was a lot of mitigating, and venues are usually really good partners, but they can't erase everything if construction's going on. And so it's those lessons learned that truly make you kind of go, oh, I'm never going to forget that again. But why have to wait until you learn a lesson to really give it reverence and to say, okay, I would like to circumvent any kind of issue unless it's completely unanticipated and completely new. So
yeah, and like you, I love reading contracts. It's just
we're a strange A to Z persona to love reading contracts. Yeah.
Now, tell me, what is some of the things that you're seeing and that you can recommend for planners to look for when they are looking at new contracts?
A great question, and I mean, there's been so much education available in the industry over the last 2 years because we've had such a dramatic game changer in COVID to our industry that, you know, those clauses that sometimes are so full of legalese that we just kind of gloss over them. There's been so much education out there about what are the foundational pieces of a great impossibility clause, things that take into effect the uniqueness of our industry. Like, you know, my understanding is that typically a force majeure clause would be interpreted to have to happen on the days of the event. Well, we learned in COVID that we can't wait until the day of the event to invoke that clause, because we have planning that happens for weeks, months, maybe years ahead of time. And so what adjustments can we make to that, you know, can we ask for in that impossibility clause that would recognize we have a planning window, a planning runway? We know now that cancellation clauses moving forward are going to be even more important, because now that COVID is known and we move out of, you know, being shuttered and people are starting to do events again, what if there's a resurgence of COVID such that it's not impossible or illegal to hold an event, but your client or your employer is gun shy of hosting an event because the rates of, well, that's no longer going to be covered in the impossibility clause because COVID is a known entity now. So now we need to look at, okay, it's going to be the cancellation terms that are going to have to work for us so that we can know, is it viable to hold the event, or do we need to look at canceling the event? And so now it's looking at the cancellation terms and saying, what are they composed of? How am I negotiating them? What are the dates that the key dates that lead up in that cancellation schedule, if you will? Do those work for me? So it's really kind of looking at cancellation with a new sense of urgency, I think. I think there's also things around indemnification. So at the very beginning of COVID, when there was such a fear of safety protocols and cleanliness in properties, I think we're past that. And I know that venues are amazing partners. They want to have safe events in their properties, but we have to look at the worst case scenario. So re-looking at indemnification clauses that protect each party from acts that the other party has allowed to happen. So there's other things, even space allocation. So are you looking with the lens of, do I need to buffer? If I want 500 people, maybe I should book and absorb the cost of booking a space that holds 800 so that I can expand. And do some distancing if we go back into a resurgence of, there's all of those angles, and there's no crystal ball, unfortunately, but it's really looking at what could happen. I think event planners and event hosts have to be really risk adverse in their contracts and really look at what are all the downsides. It's not about getting the best rate, the best space, the best dates. It's really about what is the best protective language and information that we can get into that, so that it's great to have, the best presidential suites, but I'd rather show my client that I've done my very best to minimize risk, particularly financially, in that contract. Oh, and by the way, you get the presidential suite, right? So it's those sorts of things. Right. So I think we need to really kind of relook at what are our priorities when we're negotiating? What are those must-haves? And what are those nice-to-haves? And we may have flipped a little bit in that, it's no longer about the really must-have is that, club level for all of our VIPs and, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Maybe it's about we must have this particular perspective in our impossibility clause, right? And then it's nice to have something else. So but I think there's a real onus on planners and event hosts to know what we need to look for in contracts to protect the event and the employer or the client. Because if you look at some of these cancellation damages, depending on what size of event you're hosting, if an association, for example, is depending on 90% of their attendees to an event paying for their own room and their own guest room, if you cancel the event as an association, you're paying that full amount. If you'd executed the event, maybe you're paying for 20% of the worth of the event. You've got a VIP, you've got your master account, you've got your food and beverage and your meeting space. But the cancellation damages account for all of those guest rooms that were going to be paid for by individuals. So how do you manage that? Are those cancellation terms financially viable for your client or your employer? Is that a risk that they can absorb? I think
that becomes a huge risk when you're looking at what costs you to cancel that event. Years ago, I was working on an event in Cuba, and we had all the website design. We were working with CEs and everything else, and working with different groups to pull this all together, and different hotels down in Cuba. And I had gone down to Cuba to do site checks. Thank you, client. but we had to write in specific clauses in all our agreements because we knew, unfortunately, that President Trump was going to stop US travel to Cuba. And we ended up having to cancel when he did. So that was our kind of our backup clause, was to be able to do that. But I do know it cost my client almost $200,000 to cancel an event. So it's really knowing what risk, as you say, is going to be involved in that.
And putting your legal counsel on speed dial, yes.
Yeah, exactly. And so my question for you now is, you just said the magic word, legal counsel. So you've reviewed the contract, you've given it back to them. Do you advise them to have their legal counsel look at it?
Yes, absolutely. That is not my domain. That is not, I am giving business advice from the perspective of a meeting planner only. It's not legal counsel. It's not legal advice. I have taken what has been taught in our industry through my own research about things like in public domain, but absolutely though, and on the top of my report, it says this is from a meeting planner's perspective. This is not legal advice. It needs to, and it's scary to me if they don't take it that next step. Okay. And I just got a contract back this morning that has been through the legal counsel, through an in-house counsel, and it's amazing the perspective that they add and what they change. And so absolutely, it absolutely should go through legal counsel. And I know that that's an investment, and that is the resistance, is that, you know, there's so much cost up front. But I posted on LinkedIn yesterday just about, you know, yes, it may be several $1,000s on the front end, but if you negotiate strategically, you can make up that investment on the savings that you negotiate throughout the process and recoup that cost. So yesterday I did I posted that a client, when we looked at our first draft cancellation policy and our final draft, it was down $31,000 in difference. Well, okay, so you know what? That, you know, $3,000-4,000 investment up front was tenfold what they saved if they have to cancel. And I know that it's like insurance, right? We don't want insurance until we need it. And that's exactly what these are. So, you know, yes, but to answer your question, absolutely, you need to have legal counsel as a partner. They are protecting your best interest. That contract was written with the venue's best interest.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things is that, and I always advise my clients, you know, what is your return on investment? What is that going to look like? Yeah, you want to have sales, you want to get this, you want to get that, but you also want to make sure that you're saving money on budget. And a lot don't look at that, you know, and it's explaining, you know, this is your ROI. You got to look at this from the beginning.
Yeah, and I think that's a shift that has to occur. I was talking, and I forget who it was. I wish I could remember, but it was about when I was actively planning, and I still do a little bit, but I had, you know, 9 associations on the go. And I know that for an association, for example, which is basically where my planning business was focused, if it wasn't a line item already allocated in the budget, it wasn't until the end that we really got to decide whether we could do it or not. And so when there was no line item in the budget and the forecasting and the budget development process that included expert review, that included legal counsel, quite often it was like, well, we don't have the money for it. And that's where I think we as planners can shift and help our clients move away from, well, we can't afford it, to let's build it into the budget and make it work, because it is so valuable, an exercise. Your contracts are so much better for it. Contracts are sophisticated, and we have to be equally as savvy in protecting ourselves. And so I think we can shift that process to say, if you want to work with me, or if I'm your employee, I am one of the best practices is to build that right into the budget allocation so that it's not a nice to have. It is there, the money is set aside, and you do it.
And I think as planners, we're starting to have a bigger seat at the table in regards to advising clients and employers, of course, on really the contracts. Like, you know, that's where it all starts, is the contracts. And if they're going to lose money in the long run, or something doesn't look right during the event, then you always have to go back to that contract. And if you don't look at it with a fine-tooth comb, with someone like yourself and a legal team, you could end up paying thousands and thousands of money out. And I think now that we are moving forward from being shut up or shut in for 2 years, it's more important now to look at the contracts and look at services like Planner Protect and your legal counsel to make sure that everything is in order. And and I know that the venues have been great over the past 2 years, and how many have been furloughed, and just like our industry has, been furloughed and not doing much, but we are moving forward. And we've got a few minutes left, so I want to take this time to first acknowledge, thank you very much. But what are some of the things that, in regards to new concessions or new discussions, that a planner can have in regards to contracts?
Oh, that's a great question, Deirdre. New concessions. Well, I think it does come back to the point I made earlier about really kind of flipping your list, and saying, my client can live without XYZ, like the fully stocked green room, or the fully loaded office, or the VIP with welcome amenities, and blah, 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 blah. Like some of those, and I know that those still exist, but I think it really is about addressing, where is my client or my employer most risk adverse? Can we address those heavy hitters first? Can we address, the clauses that I need to see, and do them on principle first, right? And those, they're not going to be labeled concessions in the contract. You're not going to see them under concessions, but I think that's where we have to start, is to say, can we meet on common ground on the big things? And then whatever that venue is able to do for us in other things, then those are the other wins. But it's not the other way around. We shouldn't, I don't believe, and I will just a capital I don't want to come in with, I want this, and this, right? Yeah. I really believe it needs to be more on, these are the core foundational principles or philosophies, like negotiating on profit margin versus on revenue. That's a big discussion. And I don't want to get through all of the concessions and then it gets down to that and you find out, oh, they're not willing to. Because at that point, your client is so invested and so are you, that you may give up on that. That's a really big one. So yeah. I think for me, it's about flipping and really going after the true meat and potatoes, and then getting the nice to haves. Now, I'm sure others would disagree, and that's great. I'm open to hearing those, but that's my thought, is to really, but I will say that to be able to do that, we as planners have to be able to articulate what we want. We have to be able to say in plain English, this is what I want, this is what my employer, my client needs, and explain it and defend it, and this is why it's so important. And then, because I think we're going to be working with colleagues that may be new in their position with all that's gone on with furloughed, and there may be more junior people who may not have the seasoned, experience on their side to know all these ins and outs of contracts. So if we can't explain it, then we can't fault them for not giving us what we want. So we need to be educated ourselves on what is a good contract and what are the contents, and why do we need them. So I'm a bit of a hard nose, I guess, but anyways, you know me before, so you know that.
That's right. And I always go to my clients before we even get to the contract stage and say, what's your wish list? What do you want?
Yep. What do you need?
and
What do you want?
and then we can work on the contract. So Heather, tell everybody how they can get in contact with you, and especially planners that don't have the experience with contracts. How can someone get a hold of you? What's your
Well, it's pretty simple. Look me up on plannerprotect.ca. It's not the .com, it's the .ca. And I use LinkedIn every single day, so you can look up Heather Reid and Planner Protect if you want. That's probably the easiest way. Yeah, or just ask someone. Hopefully there's a, the 7 degrees of separation. We can find one another somehow. But yeah, probably LinkedIn or my website, which is plannerprotect.ca. So thank you, Deirdra. I hope this has kickstarted what is going to be an incredibly successful endeavor for you. I think it's so important that we talk about, the meaty stuff, not just the, great trends and, what's latest and greatest, but I think we also need to really talk about the fundamentals. And I consider contracts to be an absolutely fundamental part of what we do in our industry.
Well, thank you, Heather, very much for sharing your insights and information with us this afternoon. I appreciate you being my first guest. Thank you so very much.
Oh, thank you.
For everyone out there, as Heather said, you can look her up on her LinkedIn at Heather Reid, and also plannerprotect.ca. And this will be replayed on the YouTube channel, Let's Talk Events. And I thank everyone for joining me today. And you can leave comments on the YouTube channel or also on my Facebook page, which is Concept Solutions, Public Relations, Event Management, and Website Design. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today, and have a wonderful day. Heather, thank you.
Thank you.